You're embarrassing this family," my father said, his voice dripping with disgust as I announced my decision to join the Marines. I watched my brother Jake smirk from across the dinner table. Already the golden boy, at 15. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for their approval. I just stared at the family portrait on the wall, pretending my heart wasn't shattering into pieces. Then something inside me hardened, something that would change everything. Let me take you back to the 15th of December. Launtan Ling Arshasan. I'm standing outside the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, and my hands are shaking, not from the cold, but from what I'm about to do. Inside that building, my younger brother Jake is sitting at the defendant's table, facing charges that could put him away for 30 years. And I'm about to walk in there as the star witness for the prosecution. You see, growing up in the Morrison household was like living in a constant competition where I was always coming in second place. Jake was 3 years younger than me, but somehow he was always 3 steps ahead. While I struggled to get B's in high school, Jake was getting straight A's. While I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, Jake was already building apps and getting featured in the local newspaper as a teen tech prodigy. My parents, Richard and Susan Morrison, they meant well, but they had this way of making their disappointment crystal clear. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the soundtrack of my teenage years. When Jake got a full scholarship to MIT, I remember my dad saying at the dinner table, "At least one of our kids is going somewhere in life." I was 17, sitting right there, and those words hit me like a punch to the gut. So when I announced I was joining the Marine Corps instead of going to college, you can imagine how that went over. My mother actually cried. Not tears of pride, but tears of shame. "What will we tell people?" she asked. "That our daughter threw her life away to play soldier." My father was even more direct. "I raised you better than this. Hallie, you're breaking your mother's heart. And frankly, you're embarrassing this family." The last conversation I had with them before shipping out to boot camp was on my 18th birthday. Jake had just won another science fair, and everyone was gathered around him, celebrating his latest achievement. I tried to tell them about my plans, about how I wanted to serve my country, maybe work in intelligence someday. My father looked at me with such disappointment and said, "I hope you're happy being the family disappointment, because that's all you'll ever be." I left for Paris Island the next week, and I didn't look back. For 12 years, I rebuilt myself from the ground up. The Marines taught me discipline, leadership, and most importantly, they taught me that I was capable of so much more than my family ever imagined. After my military service, I was recruited by the NSA. Can you believe that? The girl who was supposedly throwing her life away became a covert operations specialist, working in some of the most dangerous places in the world. I spent 6 years working deep cover assignments in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. I briefed senators, worked alongside foreign intelligence services, and prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed thousands of people. But here's the thing. My family never knew any of this. They thought I was just some low-level government employee, pushing papers somewhere in Washington. You might ask why I never told them. Here's the truth. After 12 years of silence, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I had found my worth in the work I was doing, in the lives I was saving, in the country I was protecting. I had become someone extraordinary, and their opinion of me couldn't change that. But life has a way of bringing everything full circle, doesn't it? In early 2023, I got assigned to a joint FBI-CIA task force investigating technology theft and espionage. We were tracking a sophisticated operation where classified government technology was being sold to foreign intelligence services. The trail led us to a tech company in Silicon Valley, Morrison Dynamics. Yes, you guessed it, my brother's company. For months, I watched from the shadows as we built our case. Jake had grown Morrison Dynamics into a billion-dollar company with major government contracts. He was the golden boy who had exceeded even my parents' wildest dreams. He was featured on magazine covers, gave TED Talks, and was regularly invited to the White House for technology summits. But behind all that success was a man who had gotten addicted to the money and the lifestyle. The government contracts weren't enough anymore. Jake had been selling classified technology blueprints to Chinese and Russian intelligence services for over 2 years. We're talking about advanced missile guidance systems, encrypted communication protocols, and cybersecurity programs that protect our nation's most sensitive infrastructure. Here's the twist that still makes my blood run cold. One of the technologies Jake sold was a facial recognition system I had personally helped develop during my early NSA days. The same system that was supposed to protect American assets overseas. Jake didn't just betray his country. He unknowingly put a target on my back and the backs of every agent I'd ever worked with. The day we arrested him, I wasn't part of the tactical team that went in. I couldn't be, but I watched from a surveillance van as my little brother, the family genius, was led away in handcuffs. My team leader looked at me and said, "Morrison, are you going to be able to handle testifying against your own brother?" I looked at the photos spread across our evidence board, photos of Jake meeting with foreign operatives, bank statements showing millions in offshore accounts, encrypted communications where he discussed selling our country's secrets, and I said, "Agent Williams." That man stopped being my brother the day he decided to betray his country. But what I didn't tell Agent Williams was the personal cost. Among the compromised technologies was the facial recognition database that had my cover identities in it. 3 of my former assets had already gone dark, and we'd lost contact completely. Jake's greed hadn't just threatened national security. It had personally endangered people I had trained and cared about. The phone call from my parents came 3 days before the trial. They hadn't spoken to me in 12 years. But suddenly they needed something. My mother's voice was shaky. "Desperate. Hallie, we need you to come to Jake's trial. We need character witnesses. People who can speak to his integrity." She paused, then added what she thought was an incentive. "We'll pay for your flight and hotel. Just please, help us save your brother." I almost laughed. They still thought I was their broke, unsuccessful daughter who needed help with travel expenses. They had no idea that I owned a house in Georgetown, drove a car that cost more than their annual income, and had a security clearance higher than most members of Congress. "I'll be there," I told them, but I didn't tell them which side I'd be on. The morning of the trial, I put on my best suit, a navy blue Armani that I'd bought after my last promotion. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had briefed the President of the United States just 3 weeks earlier about a thwarted cyber attack. I saw someone who had single-handedly prevented a terrorist attack in Prague that would have killed hundreds of innocent people. I saw a woman who had earned the respect of some of the most powerful people in the world. Walking into that courthouse was like stepping into my past and my future at the same time. I could see my parents in the gallery, clutching each other with that same desperate hope I remembered from my childhood, the hope that their golden boy would somehow escape the consequences of his actions. Jake looked different than I remembered. Older, obviously, but also harder. Success had changed him, made him arrogant. When he saw me walk in, or he actually smirked and mouthed, "Thank you" to me, assuming I was there to help him. The prosecution called their witnesses first. FBI agents testified about the evidence. Cybersecurity experts explained the damage Jake's actions had caused, and military officials discussed the operational risks his betrayal had created. It was devastating testimony, but Jake's lawyers had prepared for this. Then it was time for character witnesses for the defense. My father went first, talking about Jake's brilliance, his contributions to technology, his charitable work. My mother followed, painting a picture of a son who was simply misunderstood, who had made poor business decisions but wasn't a traitor. Former colleagues, college professors, even his high school principal testified about his character and potential. Each testimony felt like another layer of the mythology that had defined our family for so long. Jake the genius, Jake the prodigy, Jake, the golden boy, who could do no wrong. Then Judge Catherine Phillips looked up and asked, "Does the prosecution wish to call any rebuttal witnesses?" The lead prosecutor, Sarah Chen, stood up and said, "Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Hallie Morrison, The silence in that courtroom was absolute. I watched my mother's face drain of color. I saw my father's mouth fall open in shock. Jake's confident smirk disappeared as confusion took its place. They were all staring at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. For the first time in 12 years, I was about to show my family exactly who I had become. Please state your name and occupation, for the record, Sarah said. I looked directly at my parents, then at Jake, then back at the prosecutor, Hallie Elizabeth Morrison. I'm a senior intelligence officer with the National Security Agency, currently on special assignment with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. The gasp from my mother was audible throughout the courtroom. My father made a choking sound. Jake stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. But what really got to him was when I added, and for the record, Your Honor, I was the original developer of 3 of the systems the defendant sold to foreign entities. Agent Morrison, how long have you been with the intelligence community? 12 years. I started with the Marine Corps Intelligence Division, then transitioned to the NSA 6 years ago. And what is your current assignment? I lead a joint task force focused on preventing the theft and illegal export of classified U.S. technology to foreign intelligence services. Specifically, I oversee the security of technologies that I myself helped develop. Sarah nodded. Agent Morrison, are you familiar with the defendant? I looked directly at Jake, holding his gaze for a long moment. Yes, he's my younger brother, and unfortunately, he's also responsible for compromising some of the most sensitive work I've done in my career. What followed was 45 minutes of the most difficult testimony I've ever given. I explained our investigation, the evidence we'd gathered, the national security implications of Jake's actions. I testified about the technology he'd sold, the foreign operatives he'd worked with, the damage assessment our intelligence community had conducted. But the most devastating moment came when Sarah asked, in your professional opinion, does the defendant pose a flight risk? Absolutely, I replied. Based on our surveillance, the defendant has established relationships with foreign intelligence services in 4 different countries. He has $18 million in offshore accounts across 7 different banks, and our intercepts show he was planning to leave the country permanently the night before his arrest. We also recovered a go bag from his residence, containing fake identification documents and currency from multiple countries. I could see Jake's lawyers frantically taking notes. You see my parents gripping each other so tightly, their knuckles were white? They were beginning to understand that this wasn't their disappointing daughter playing dress-up. This was someone else entirely, someone they had never bothered to know. When Jake's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, he was clearly struggling. How do you attack the credibility of a senior NSA intelligence officer without destroying your client's case? Agent Morrison, he began carefully. Isn't it true that you and your brother have been estranged for over a decade? That's correct. Isn't it possible that personal feelings are influencing your professional judgment here? I gave him the same smile I'd used in interrogation rooms with foreign spies. Calm, confident, and absolutely certain. Counselor, personal feelings don't create offshore bank accounts. Personal feelings don't manufacture classified documents found in someone's possession. Personal feelings don't fabricate recorded conversations with known foreign intelligence operatives. The evidence speaks for itself. And my personal relationship with the defendant is irrelevant to the facts of this case. There was really nothing more he could ask. After I stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. I walked back to my seat, and this time every eye that followed me held a different expression. Respect, fear, recognition. Some of the people in that gallery knew exactly who I was now, what I represented, what I was capable of. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Jake was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As they led him away, he stopped and looked back at me one final time. Hallie, he said, his voice breaking, I never knew it was your work. I stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear my next words. That's the point. Jake, you never bothered to know anything about me. And now, because of your greed. 3 people I trained personally went missing for months. Their families thought they were dead because you sold my facial recognition system to the highest bidder. The color drained from his face as the full weight of what he'd done hit him. My name is Agent Morrison, I said, loud enough for our parents to hear, and you stopped being my brother the day you put a price tag on American lives. Outside the courthouse, my parents approached me like strangers approaching a celebrity. They seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of everything they'd learned. Hallie, my mother whispered, is it true? Are you really? My name is Agent Morrison, I said, not looking up from my phone where I was already responding to messages from my team. And yes, it's all true. My father cleared his throat. We had no idea. You never told us. You never asked? I replied, finally looking at them. In 12 years, neither of you ever asked what I did for work. You assumed I was still the failure who couldn't live up to Jake's potential. My mother reached toward me, tears streaming down her face. But sweetheart, if we had known you were so successful, so important, you would have what? I interrupted. Been proud of me, loved me. I shook my head. I didn't become successful for you. I became successful despite you. And because you raised a son who thought money was more important than loyalty. 3. Good people spent months in enemy hands, their families not knowing if they were alive or dead. My voice broke slightly on those last words, and for the first time, my mother saw the real cost of what Jake had done, not just to national security, but to me personally. My phone buzzed. A text from my director. Outstanding work on the Morrison case. The 3 missing assets have been recovered alive. Your quick actions saved their lives. Need you back in Fort Meade tomorrow for the Security Council briefing. The president wants a personal commendation ceremony. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They were alive. The people Jake had unknowingly put in danger were safe. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Another meeting in the Situation Room. Another briefing for people who shaped policy at the highest levels of government. Another day in the life my family had never bothered to ask about. I looked at my parents one final time. These people who had given me life but had never really known me. I have a flight to catch. I said, Will we see you again? My mother asked, her voice breaking. I paused at the courthouse steps. Maybe, I said, when you figure out how to love the daughter you have, not the one you wish you'd had. As I walked away, I could hear my mother sobbing behind me. But for the first time in my life, their pain wasn't my responsibility to fix. The car that picked me up was a black sedan with government plates. As we drove toward the airport, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the disappointment my family had created in their minds. She was someone who had prevented terrorist attacks, who had saved countless lives, who carried secrets that could change the course of history. She was someone I was proud to be. My phone rang, my deputy calling with an update on our next operation. Morrison here, I answered, and for the first time in 12 years, saying, my name felt like coming home to myself. The courthouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror, taking with it the last remnants of the girl who had desperately wanted her family's approval. In her place sat a woman who had learned that the most powerful form of success isn't destroying those who underestimated you. It's becoming so extraordinary that their dismissal reveals more about them than it ever did about you. You know what I realized that day? Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living your truth so powerfully that the people who doubted you can't ignore it anymore. My name is Hallie Morrison. I'm 35 years old, and I am nobody's disappointment anymore. But here's what I want to know from all of you watching this. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you most? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? And most importantly, when the people who hurt you finally realize their mistake, is it ever too late for forgiveness? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your stories too. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone in this journey of becoming who we're meant to be. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next video.